Hi guys, just before we get into today's episode, I just wanted to ask you a big favor. Assuming you like the content that I'm putting out on this channel, could you please do me a favor and press the subscribe button? It really does help reach more people. And while you're at it, if you could just smash that like button down there, we'd really appreciate it. I just want to get this channel out to as many people as possible, so more and more people are getting exposed to these kinds of stories. And I'll stop talking now and let you get into the episode. Welcome to another episode of the Chronic Comeback Podcast. Today, I am really happy and excited to have on the show Jodie Goss. Now, just before we get into the episode itself, I want to give you guys a bit of an introduction into Jodie's story. So her health story began in early 2006 when she came down with shingles and then flu-like symptoms, which ended up being Epstein-Barr virus or mono, as Americans like to call it. Having just accepted a dream job, she pushed herself through sometimes debilitating symptoms, but although she hoped they would improve, they just got worse. And so after being tested for every illness under the sun, she was eventually told she had chronic fatigue syndrome. The doctors said it could last for months, even years, and there was no cure or treatment. And so she was understandably devastated. She went from doctor to doctor with little improvement and was even told by one doctor that she would need to learn to live with it, which infuriates me because that's exactly what I was told, and it still burns me to this day. This was something that she would not accept, however, and she kept pushing on and looking for solutions. And one day she was reading a newspaper article about someone who had fully recovered from chronic fatigue, and after taking the lightning process, which I know we've talked about on the show before, and so she took a leap of faith and booked herself onto the course, and this is what changed her life forever. Since doing the course, she's been able to run the London Marathon. She got married, had two amazing kids, and has moved to LA, which I'm incredibly jealous about, which we just talked about. And she's now actually retrained an entirely new professional discipline and is now actually a lightning practitioner. And so she helps countless others recover from chronic illness. Sorry, that was a really long intro, but you've done a lot. It's a long story, so in a good way.
That's okay.
How are you doing?
I'm very good. Thank you so much for having me today.
No problem. Nice to have a fellow Brit on. Cool. Well, if we could go back to before 2006 when you started, you got the shingles, and what was life like before then from a health perspective? Were you always healthy? Did you have like things going on like throughout your childhood? What was life like then?
I had a very happy childhood. If I look back, I can see there were sort of things health-wise peppered throughout my childhood and teenage years, which may have been indications that something else was, going on. So like I used to get tonsillitis all the time, like all the time. I had so much antibiotics for it. I remember when I was quite young, I was always really stuffed up. And so they gave me lots of tests if I'm allergic to dairy and to gluten. And I eventually had my adenoids out. And then teenage years, I was always quite anxious. So I never went on like a school trip. They went skiing for a week and I never joined them, or I had panic attacks if I was going for an evening out and things like that. So there were bits and pieces that were going on. And then aside from health, when I was quite young, just before I turned 3, I lost my father to cancer. So I had a trauma quite young in my life. And we may get into this, but I can see how maybe that also had an effect on my nervous system and how that was functioning. But as I said at the beginning, generally I had a very happy childhood, a very loving family, very supportive. But yes, in answer to your question, there were a few things going on that may have led up to me eventually being chronically unwell.
Yeah, I think it's when people talk about trauma and stuff like that, I think if you get to the age of 25 or 21 and there's nothing you can point towards in your life, then you probably haven't lived a life. There's always something that's going on. That resonates for me. Like I had quite like I'd say normal upbringing, but then looking back on it, I was like, okay, yeah, that probably could have contributed to that. But then, so what happened? Was shingles? Was that the first thing that happened?
Yeah, well, what happened, I used to work in the radio industry. I was a journalist and I was a newsreader, and then I specialized in entertainment. And so I had this I was doing really well in my career, and I was working for the biggest commercial radio group in the UK. Um, and then I got offered a job at Capital Radio, which things have changed since I was in the industry, but it was at the time like the biggest London station, and it was a pretty big deal to get offered that job, and like a dream of mine. I was feeling quite tired because anybody who works in the entertainment industry knows there's a lot of late nights, early starts, long hours, pressure. And so I thought, I'm going to take a couple of weeks off just to reboot a little bit before I start this new job. And within about 2 days of taking that break, I then came out with a rash on my face and felt awful, and it was shingles. So it was almost like when I stopped, suddenly my body went, pew, and it just, and so that was the beginning. I sort of had this 2 weeks off and recovered from shingles, meaning the rash disappeared, but I still felt like I had shingles. I still felt fluey. I felt still was achy and tired and brain foggy, but I had this amazing job that I was about to start. So I was well enough to do it, to get started, but it sort of started me off on this. I felt like the only way I can explain it is I felt like I was pushing through mud every day. I could get myself up and I could get on the train and I could get to work and I could do it and I could come home and then I'd be exhausted, and then the same thing the next day. It was that kind of feeling, but I didn't want to let that go. So I was investigating all other ways to get better. Went back to the doctor, more blood tests, when they said I had glandular fever, which is, as you said, also known as mono. And they said it would be 6 to 8 weeks and then you should get better. And then after 6 to 8 weeks, I still didn't feel better. And so saw a specialist. Before that, I tried a few other things to get well, dietary things and supplements and alternative therapies. Got an appointment with who I was told was like the top ME chronic fatigue syndrome specialist in London. And anybody who's been given that kind of an appointment, like I was literally counting off the days on my calendar because I was like, that's my answer. I'm going to get there and they're going to tell me. And so I got there, and he was a very nice gentleman, but he basically said to me, like, there's nothing we can do. This is just the way it is. And some people get better in months. Sometimes it can take years, and sometimes people don't get better. And I remember the feeling very clearly of like, excuse me? Like, I was so shocked because I really thought this was my moment. And yeah, I mean, it could make me get emotional now, even thinking about it. It was so heartbreaking at that moment. But what he said to me was, we're quite a way into this journey at this point. I was unwell for 3 years, but he said to me, take some antidepressants. I'm going to give you some antidepressants because that's going to help with the chemical imbalance. And I said, I'm not depressed. I'm furious because I just want to get well and I want to get on with my life. He said, no, I know that, but it's going to help a bit. And to be honest, it did help me. I was on a very small dose, so I don't know if it was the antidepressants or the placebo, my idea of him telling me it was going to help, but it got me to a point where I was able to manage a bit better day to day, because before that I'd had some periods I had to take chunks of time off work and couldn't get out of bed. And other times, like I said, I was well enough to get into the office and work through things. But it got me to a point where I could function more day to day. So during those 9 months I was on that medicine, I came to LA and covered the Oscars. I went around Europe and was covering the MTV Awards. So I was able to do stuff, but I had in the back of my head that what happens when I come off these, right? It felt like I kind of knew it was a band-aid for something that I wasn't dealing with and working through. And the other weird irony when this was all going on is literally the month that I got the job at Capital and that I was diagnosed with, I got the shingles and then the mono, I actually got together with who is now my husband. And so it was this very weird time of sort of the most amazing things happening because I was falling in love at the same time as having this great job, at the same time as feeling awful. But after this 9 months on this medicine, like we knew we were getting serious and we were going to get married and hopefully eventually have children. And I remember thinking, what happens if this comes back again when I've got kids? Like, or if I want to come off the medication when I'm pregnant and then I have chronic fatigue syndrome again, what do I do? So that for me was like, I'm going to come off them now, under medical supervision in a very safe way and see what happens. So I did that. And within 3 days of coming off them, I had shingles again. And so it was like this moment of like, I had tried so many things. I mean, alternative therapies, hospital stays to measure my brain waves, sleep studies. I was a journalist. I was like, I researched everything to the nth degree. There was like nothing I hadn't tried. And it was sort of at that point, I was like, by that point, I couldn't get out of bed. I had to stop working for a very long period of time. And it was a moment of like, I need to find something completely different. And as these things sometimes do, someone then sent me an article from a newspaper about somebody who'd taken this training program called the lightning process and recovered from chronic fatigue syndrome. And then somebody else I heard about had taken it, and then somebody else. And so that set the wheels in motion of a new area, like mind body connection work, which I hadn't tried and didn't know much about. I wasn't sure about it to begin with. It took me 4 months before I actually signed up. But yeah, that for me was the thing that changed everything, really, that got my life back on track.
What were your like? Because yeah, trying to walk through mud. I think that's what you said was like it resonates with me so much. I remember the tube station next to my work. It was like, I don't know, like 25 steps, and I'd get to the end at the top of the steps every day, and I'd just every day I go, oh, and it would just be like it would just drain all of the energy out of me, and I'd have to go and put this like fake smile on at work, pretending I was okay, and yeah, it just properly resonates with me. When you were going through that like phase, how does it affecting like your relationships in your life? I know you said you had a new romantic relationship, but I'm just talking every relationship's like your family, your friends. Was there a disconnect there? Did people understand?
Family was easy for me. I have very supportive siblings and parents, and we had someone very close to us who'd had chronic fatigue, so they had understood it as well from seeing somebody else that we knew go through it. Friends were also supportive. I was supportive, like you can never really understand what's going on for somebody with a chronic illness unless you've experienced it yourself, I feel. So as much as somebody could be supportive, that they were, but you sort of pull back from life because there was only so much you could do, and an invitation out wasn't like, yes, let's go out. I was in my late 20s. It was like, can I do this? How am I going to feel tomorrow? What am I going to do about work this week? There were so many other things I was navigating when you get invited out to do something socially. So yes, as much as they could be supportive, they were. And I was very lucky with my husband, that he was just like, I'm with you. Like, I know we're going to be together, and I know we're going to get married. And I know he was the one that was like, I know you're going to get well. It's like not a doubt in my mind. He had the belief way before I did.
Wow.
So yes, I count myself very lucky in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, and because that's something I think about a lot in terms of like, and I guess I didn't think about it at the time, like those little experiences I was having that was adding to that belief that I wouldn't get better, which is something you have to, with brain retraining and stuff like that, you have to try and reverse. The effect of that doctor saying to you, was it the so I also can't believe the best chronic fatigue specialist in the UK was a guy who just said, you've got to live with it. Is that what he does? He just waits. There's a waiting list of people that just come and see him, and he tells you, you just got to live with it. And that's how good he is.
Like, it's so tricky because at the time I was so hurt by it and so upset. But now I understand in hindsight, like there's always a line that rings for me, like everyone's doing the best they can
Yeah.
with the skills and the knowledge that they have. And when I was unwell, so I got better 13 years ago, but I started to be unwell 16 years ago. And then like people weren't talking about this stuff at all. I wasn't on social media. Not many people knew necessarily what was going on for me unless they were close friends. I had to tell my employer at some point, but it wasn't something that people knew or spoke about. And from a traditional medical standpoint, I understand why he said that, because there isn't a drug that you can say, here you go, take this, and
Yeah.
you're going to get better. So I don't think he meant any harm. I think what he was trying to say is prepare yourself because it could be a long journey.
Yeah.
And so I wonder now, if I went back now, it might be a completely different scenario. I don't know. Although I do know, like you and other clients of mine now who have similar stories, but I still try and come from the standpoint, just because I find it useful that I'm not holding on to that,
Yeah.
is he didn't mean any harm. And had he just said, here's a magic pill, that might have caused a different issue for me. You know what I mean? You just don't know. So I've forgotten your original question. I'm
No,
not
no,
sure
no,
if I've
no, no. I went off at a tangent. No, just I mean on that, like I completely agree with you. By the way, sorry, I guess I wasn't. I'm not. It's never about this. Well, actually, some doctors have a terrible bedside manner. The one that actually told me I should live with it, he was. I know he was just like he didn't care about what I was going through. But in that same doctor's surgery, I had a female GP, and she had the same like lack of knowledge, and so it's a systemic problem that causes that. But she was like, I know what you're going through is real. Like, mate, could you try this? Could you try that? And you could tell she genuinely cared. And I think that's where the difference lies in particular way. And we don't feel like you're being heard. And so I think that's the key thing. So what was my question when I was going back through it? Oh yeah, in terms of like actually like your belief to get better, was that something that you had from like the beginning, and or did you have like big doubts about that, or do you always thinking I know I'm going to recover?
No, I was absolutely terrified,
Right.
but I wasn't.
Yeah.
And that belief took a long time to come for me. And I felt, and again, this is my story is the same but different, right? It's I tried so many things, and each time you try something new, you pin all your hopes on it, like this is going to be the thing. And then sometimes you feel better, and then it starts to go away again, and that's so disappointing. You try something else, it's the same story, and it's your brain starts to get into a pattern of predicting and expecting that any sign of something good happening is going to be followed by something bad. So unconsciously, that's also being programmed in the more things that you're trying almost. And again, at that time, there wasn't much conversation about it. So when I did hear of other people, it wasn't that people had chronic fatigue and got better. It was that people didn't really get better. So when I saw that article in the paper, it was like, oh, people actually can get better. And I guess there was something in that moment that's like, well, if somebody else can, maybe I can too.
Yeah.
But that wasn't, that was more of a conscious thought, where as opposed to an unconscious feeling. And I remember calling my lightning process practitioner the night before I did the seminar, crying my eyes out, because I'd kind of got to that point of like, I'm so ready to do this. I want to do this. I believe I can get well. And then suddenly I was like, well, what if I can't? What if I'm that person it doesn't work for? What if?
Yeah.
To be honest, that moment of really stepping into that new belief system for me was when things completely changed. I now believe for me is like the most fundamental part of working with anybody who wants to recover from chronic illness.
I'll definitely ask some questions about that. But in terms of the actual lightning process itself, like, could you talk us through, like at a high level, what that is, and how that quickly that might have worked for you, and how effectively it worked for you?
Yeah. So the lightning process, the main chunk of it, I guess, is a 3 half-day seminar, where you're really understanding about the mind-body connection, the science of the mind-body connection, and how and why the body has got stuck in its healing process. Because ultimately, our bodies are designed to heal. And so what is going on within the system that is stopping it from doing that? So it's really getting a good understanding of that, and then being given very specific tools in how to, it's kind of like resetting the system. Like, when your phone doesn't work properly, and so you can try and delete a few apps, or you try and delete some of your photos and things like that, but it's still a bit slow and it's still not quite working properly. And sometimes you need to just turn the whole thing off and give it a reboot.
Yeah.
For me, that's kind of what the LP is like. It's like, it's really reset the nervous system, because what we tend to find is those who are not recovering and having long-term symptoms, their nervous system is not working in the way that it's designed to. It's out of balance. I don't know how much you know about the nervous system, but the sympathetic, the fight and flight response is overstimulated. And when that happens over a long period of time, your parasympathetic gets suppressed. It doesn't work properly. And that's the part that looks after your healing and immune system.
Yeah.
So what we're looking at is, how do we get that back into balance? So it's a mixture of really understanding the science of the mind-body connection, and then being given practical tools to start getting things back into balance and kickstart the body's natural ability to heal. So the main chunk of that happens in those 3 days. But there's a lot of conversation before anybody comes onto the course. And then there's also follow-up sessions afterwards. So my experience of that was I didn't, until the end of the third day, I didn't notice any physical changes. In fact, I remember crying a lot on day 2, but by the end of the third day, I remember just having this shift in my belief, which was, I get this. I think I found my answer. And that changed how I felt so much, because I suddenly felt empowered to know what to do. I suddenly understood that I could be influential in my own health and well-being, and I didn't have to outsource everything and wait to see what happened. I could do something about it. And I found that really helpful. And I remember leaving the seminar. I lived in the sort of suburbs of London at the time, but leaving the seminar in central London, walking to the tube station, getting the train home, and then walking home. And that for me was more than I'd done in a very long time. So, and that was like, oh gosh, if I can do that after just 3 days, I wonder what else I could do. So I just, the lightning process isn't about turning up on the seminar. And I always say to my clients now, I wish I had a magic wand and I could say, just come and join me for 3 days and we can chat lots and I can wave a magic wand and you'll be better. It's not like that. There's like a lot of, there's work and there's effort and there's consistency, and there is, sometimes having to look at things that feel a bit uncomfortable and unfamiliar. But when you really step into that, that's when you start to make those changes. So for me, it began as I finished the course, and then after 3 weeks, I remember going for my first jog. It was on Hampstead Heath. So I took the course at the beginning of January. And in February, it must have been mid-January. So beginning of February, I went for a hike in the freezing cold and I wrapped up. And I remember just jogging and being like, I can't believe I'm doing this. I made this happen. So that was a really game-changing moment for me. And then I was back at work full-time after 6 weeks. That was my trajectory, but everyone's is different. Some people get changed really quickly, and for some people it takes longer.
Yeah.
But it's just knowing that you're going to get there. That's the bit to keep on remembering.
So I've got loads of questions, but in terms of the kind of conditions that the lightning process can treat, I don't know, and this is probably not correct at all. I've got this like a belief that it seems to be geared towards chronic fatigue, and not many other conditions. And because I hear a lot of people recovering who've got CFS, but they're not maybe as, and so I don't know. Again, that maybe adds to my belief that, oh, is it more around fatigue, and so that's easier to to recover from, just because I've got a lot of other symptoms. Is it to do with, is it to treat all kinds of different like chronic illnesses?
Yeah, it began with chronic fatigue syndrome, but there is such a long list of different conditions. I'll probably say the ones I see the most of is chronic fatigue, chronic pain, fibromyalgia, anxiety, depression. And then, yes, so in the past year, I've had a lot of long COVID clients. But, it's been food intolerances, skin disorders, insomnia, migraines. There's a much longer list on my website if you wanted to see it. But ultimately, what we're looking for is why, when some people are unwell, do they get better? And for others, they can't seem to shift the symptoms. And so that can be from a range of different conditions. Sometimes that can kick off from, so for me, it was shingles. For some people, it can be COVID. For others, it can be a trauma. For others, it can be more of a slow burner, like a slow buildup of things. It's not a one formula
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And what we would always say is, if it's something that if you hear about it and learn about it, there's lots of sort of videos online and audio programs and books. Like, if it resonates with you, then give a practitioner a call,
Yeah.
and we'll always give an honest opinion about, actually, this is something we could help, we believe we could help with, or something that we think you might need to go elsewhere for.
What's your view on, so people who've got is people who've got mold, like chemical sensitivities, is that in the same kind of, is that on the list of things that you treat as well, those kinds of things?
It is, yeah. Again, it's a case by case basis, but if we're
Right.
speaking generally about it, when you're thinking about all those things you said, mold, chemical sensitivities, that kind of stuff. The way that I kind of describe it in a very general way is if you imagine my hands being your autonomic nervous system, and this is your parasympathetic and your sympathetic, and what you want it to be is you want them to be aligned, right? You want your parasympathetic to be working most of the time, and occasionally something stressful happens. This one switches off and this one fires up. And then
Yeah.
when that stressful thing is over, it goes back down to baseline again. And this one does its magic, right? That's how it's meant to work.
Mm.
What happens when people are dealing with chronic symptoms or are unwell or stressed for a long period of time or whatever's going on for them is this ends up being overstimulated for a long period of time, suppressing this one, like we mentioned earlier. When it comes to things like mold or chemical sensitivities or food sensitivities, whatever that might be, if the nervous system was in balance, it might have a small reaction to mold and then go back down to baseline. But because the nervous system is already like this, something that should create a small response in the system ends up creating a big response because it's already sort of off the scale up here. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
And so that's what we're doing. So again, once you start to get that nervous system back into balance, when you come into contact with things like that, there might be a small response, but a more regulated, normal response to it.
Yeah, yeah, that does make sense. And actually, I was on. I had someone on last week. We haven't released the episode yet, but I was talking about when I didn't even hear about mold as an issue for about 9 years until into my own health journey. And when I found out about it, I was like, oh yes, makes so much sense. Right, get me away from mold, because everything says get yourself out of mold. And now I'm like, wow, no, that's actually giving myself more of a belief that there's something to be scared of and something to be frightened of. And probably my limbic system, I'm in fight or flight more, because when I walk into a room or a new building, I'm like, oh God, is there mold in here? Do you think that can actually, the knowledge of that can actually make it worse?
So that story is something I hear so much, because
Yeah.
then, look, there are absolutely some situations where mold can be really dangerous. Right? You
Yeah.
don't want to be living in a moldy room, and that's that. But that's a normal response, if you see what I mean. But when
Sure.
there's a small piece of small amount of mold, but your
Yeah.
body's having a huge reaction, that might be a sign that there's something out of balance. Because sometimes someone does exactly what you said. They move out of an apartment or a house because of mold, but then they'll have the same response to an air freshener. And
Yeah.
they'll say it's because it's too scented. It's
Yeah.
like, well, why do some people not respond in that way and other bodies do? So that's what we're looking at is, it tends to be a dysregulation of the nervous system, which is creating these different symptoms that are showing up in different ways in different people. And that's why something like the lightning process or a brain retraining or using neuroplasticity can be such a good way of solving things, because I'm going off on a slight tangent here, but people don't tend to come and work with me as a first port of call.
No.
They've
Yeah.
they've tried lots of other things first.
Yeah.
And I often say that getting your nervous system in a good state needs to almost be the first step. Do that first, and then you'll get more of a benefit of all of these other amazing modalities that are out there. Of
Yeah.
course, everybody's body is different, and there are other things that work too, but that's what I tend to find.
No, I think you're so right. I mean, so when I first found out about the mold, I was instructed that I needed to move out of the place I was in. And to be honest, I mean, I did get it tested, and my place was dangerously high with mold, so it was a good idea. But then
Yeah.
we had to throw everything away that we had. We had to clean everything off that we had, and I don't know whether all of that extreme stuff just made me just even more attuned to that. And so now I've got a belief that mold is my biggest problem. So I'm thinking about it more than I should do. And yeah, actually, my biggest problem is that my nervous system my nervous system is dysregulated, and that I actually need to be, and I was talking about it again on the podcast last week, I need to be able to live with mold, not run away from it. And so do you think that doing mold as an example, but I guess, a lot of things, can you get better in a situation where you're around something like mold? Even, I'm not saying dangerous black mold all over the wall, but
Yeah.
I guess just living in a normal old UK house that's had water damage.
I want to compare it to other things, and this might help explain how something like, brain training, the LP, can help with lots of different conditions. your story around mold, I see with people who are having food intolerances, for example, and digestive issues.
Yeah.
Because, so let's say that somebody has been told gluten is the thing, right? You can't have gluten because when you do, your body goes into an inflammatory response, which may be true, right? It's not that it's not true. It's not that it's in their mind, it's a physiological response in their body, but why is their body reacting in such a big way to it? So if you think of somebody who goes to a restaurant and they don't want to have gluten, they'll say, I'll have the bolognese, please, but I want to have gluten-free pasta. But what are they then thinking about while the chef's cooking it? Like, did the waiter take that down right? Did they really write down gluten-free pasta? And then when they check with the waiter again, they bring the food and they're like, oh, maybe they accidentally mixed it up. Then they're eating that food in a state of stress because they're like, I'm eating it and they said it's gluten-free, but what if it's not gluten-free? Can you see where I'm going with this? And then they're getting themselves more and more worked up. And then the question is it probably wasn't gluten, it probably was gluten free, but even if it wasn't, is it the gluten that's causing the reaction, or is it the state of their nervous system while they're eating the food that's
Yeah.
causing the reaction?
Yeah.
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 It's the same with fatigue. When someone says, do you want to go for a walk? If that person is thinking the whole time they're walking, I'm doing too much, I shouldn't be doing this. My doctor said to me that I should only be doing 10 minutes and I've done 15 minutes. And what does that, we get into that cycle, the fight and flight is getting more and more elevated. So is it the walk or is it the state of the nervous system at the time of doing that walk?
Yeah. Yeah. That
You
makes,
see how it all
yeah,
correlates?
totally.
I just want to be clear, we're talking very generally here. Like there are cases with mold and there are food sensitivities that, so we're talking in a general sense here.
Yes, there's outliers with everything.
Yes.
No, completely. And so in terms of the actual processes themselves, I started the Gupta program and then I didn't properly progress with that. And the one I'm doing at the moment, there's a lot of, and I've talked about it in a few podcast episodes recently, there's a lot of emphasis on visualization and I guess connecting with a feeling from that like visual that you have in that moment, either a memory or a future point in time or something like that. And I have a lot of problems doing that. Like I find it really difficult to, because I did. Have you done anything? Have you ever done like Joe Dispenza work before? Yeah.
I haven't did his courses, but I'm very familiar with his stuff. I've read
Yeah.
his books.
So a lot of that is like feeling the emotion of that particular moment in time, whether it's past or in the future. And I always found that really difficult. Do you think that is that like a part of the lightning process? Is that like imperative to like, I guess making progress in brain retraining? Could you give me some detail on that?
Yeah. So if I just ask you something, have you ever had anxiety before?
Yeah. I mean, I have,
100%
but
anxiety.
it's like, yeah, I think I've got anxiety like most people in this century do.
Yeah, well, the reason I ask that is because if you've experienced anxiety, my belief is that you're able to visualize,
Okay.
because anxiety is the structure of anxiety is throwing yourself into an imagined future and imagining things not going how you want them to and feeling those horrible feelings right now. That's basically what anxiety is. Depression is kind of doing it in reverse. It's like looking at the past and remembering awful things or difficult times and feeling those feelings now. So you are able to visualize, it's just your brain is not used to visualizing in a more positive way. That muscle isn't built, if that makes sense.
I think it's more, I know I can visualize, yeah, in a uncontrollably in a bad way. In fact, I was doing it when I was trying to sleep last night. But it's more that I can't do it on cue, and like I can't just go, okay, I'm going to sit here, and because I was doing my round this morning, and I actually could visualize what I was. It's more like I could visualize it, but I couldn't feel how I would feel in that moment. Is that just practice and you just got to keep going?
If visualization doesn't resonate, what we're always looking for is creating the feeling. The visualization is a construct to help you create the feeling.
Okay.
So there are other ways of doing that. So sometimes I do it with music or with movement or with sense or sense. So there's lots of different ways to create the feeling. So remind me of what your original question was, because I'm going off on a tangent again. Are there other ways to create the feeling?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it was that I was saying I could visualize it, but I couldn't get the feeling.
Right. Yeah. So you can use other ways to create the feeling, but it's also, my belief again is that it's about building up that muscle. It's about believing that you can do that and training the brain to get used to using that modality to help you. However, for the LP, visualization is one part of it. There's
Okay.
lots of different other parts of it. And what I found helpful when I took the LP and what I love doing with my clients now is we are working in sort of real time. So when they're practicing it during those 3 days and those sort of issues come up, I can work through them with them in that moment, to understand or to help them find other ways around it. Or to, I often see like a belief that's coming up that maybe they haven't spotted that is getting in the way of it. So even just your belief now of saying, I just can't do it in the moment,
Yeah.
whilst you might have some experience of that, and I'm not denying that, but does that mean that you can't do it going forward?
Mm.
It just means we just need to find other ways of helping your brain to do it in a way that resonates more for you.
And do you do so? I actually like the thought, and I'm sure that this probably isn't going on now because of COVID and stuff. But actually going somewhere for 3 days, doing it intensively, and then going on your way. So do you do that online now? Do you work with a group of people, or do you work with one person? How do you do it?
So right now I'm working mainly on Zoom. I used to do it in person and travel around, or people would come to my house. But the course that I do is one of many amazing brain training, neuroplastically based courses out there. And they all work slightly differently. And I think it's really important that if somebody's interested in this area, that they research, they find one that resonates for them. Some of them are more sort of, you just do it online and they're video based. And you work through it by yourself. And for some people, they much prefer doing it in that way. For other people, and those who maybe come to work with me, they want somebody to work with them directly in that moment to really get, nail those tools. And that's what I try and do is like during those 3 days, my job is to help people really know how to use the lightning process tools proficiently so they can continue doing that in their own time with me there to support them. So that works for people, for different people, and I do it now as part of a small group. Some people prefer to do a one-to-one with me, and others love working in a small group and watching other people make change and seeing how I'm working with them, people with different conditions, but seeing a bit of themselves or some of those patterns that maybe someone else is experiencing, but they notice that in themselves too. So yeah, if someone is interested, they should really like do the research. There's amazing practitioners out there all over the world now, which is so incredible,
Yeah.
who are offering these tools in slightly different ways.
Do you think that it almost feels, because now having recorded close to 90 episodes, I think it is now, which is crazy. So many people, and I think someone mentioned it on a YouTube comment the other day. There's just such a common theme of people needing this element of like either emotional or mind body work to recover. It's a handful of people I think who've recovered on my podcast just through diet changes or maybe like medication or something. Do you think actually this should just be the first port of call before anyone like does anything else, or do you think there is other things to add to it, like with diet and everything?
That's a really interesting question. Well, I think there's value in all of these things, right? I wouldn't say to somebody, come and do brain retraining, but live on a fast food diet, because, that wouldn't work either. And sometimes I think we have to go through these steps to then get to that place where we're ready to do it. So if I'd have signed up, even, I'd been unwell for a good 2.5, almost 3 years before I found out about the LP. If I'd have taken it the day that I found out about it, I don't think I'd have got the same results as having waited 4 months until I really understood the concepts, until I really knew that they resonated with me. So my feeling is everybody's body is different. Everyone's experience is different. No two people with chronic fatigue syndrome, mold intolerances, food allergies, depression, none of them are exactly the same. So sometimes it can feel overwhelming to think there's so many options out there, like where do I begin? But we could reframe and say it's amazing there are so many options out there, like where lots
Yeah,
of
no,
choices
no.
there. And that can be really quite exciting if we think about it in that way. And again, when I first was unwell 16 years ago and got better 13 years ago, at that time, when I tried meditation, maybe this was just my circle or where I was in the world, but people weren't really doing it very much. It was still thought to be quite woo, like that we were out there doing meditation and mindfulness. And now here we are, and traditional doctors are recommending that their clients, their patients, use mindfulness and meditation. So in my hope and my belief is that in the next 10 to 15 years, brain retraining, understanding neuroplasticity, understanding that we can be in charge of our own health and well-being in a much more influential and empowering way. I hope that's going to be the narrative going forward, because what is taking people to the doctor is changing. Right? It used to be very acute things that needed medicine or an operation. And don't get me wrong, there is amazing value in traditional medicine and people still need that.
Yeah,
But what is taking more people to the doctor nowadays is chronic ongoing symptoms.
yeah.
And we need to sort of, my belief is that we need to sort of change how we're responding to that. So yeah, my hope is that this becomes more mainstream and isn't the last resort and is more of a mainstream, oh yeah, no, that makes total sense, let's do that. I know lots of people who've done things like that in the way that meditation or yoga is, or mindfulness is like that now.
Yeah, I'd said I hope that happens like in the next 10 to 15 years. I think people can lose so many years of their life like trying to keep hammering down the traditional medical system. And that's, yeah, again, the sad thing about doing this podcast is I hear a lot of stories of people just going down the wrong route for too long. I just think it's amazing that you saw that article that one day. It's funny how the universe works, isn't it? Like if you hadn't picked up that one day, you might have gone down a different route, and now you're able to help countless other people. So that's amazing. How do you feel this whole experience has like improved your life? Like how different is your life in a positive way compared to how it could have been had you not got sick?
Oh, um, so it's interesting. After I took the LP, I then went back to working in radio and video and online and things, and then got married and had my daughter. Then we moved to LA, and I needed to use the LP again in a different capacity because we moved here, and that first year I found really, really tough. I was very lonely. My husband travels a lot for work. I was by myself with my daughter. I was pregnant with my second child. I thought I was going to fit into American culture much easier than I did. I found it really tough. And I picked up the LP tools again and used it for myself then, because I noticed I was like meeting people, and then I would leave being like, oh, that I wasn't myself at all. I just didn't feel like myself. So I used the LP again then to kind of just get back my confidence and things like that. And I was chatting to a friend and they said, well, maybe you should train to become a practitioner. It's helped you twice in your life in a really impactful way. And I'd always thought at one point that I would. And so that, again, it's like, funny, these conversations. I was like, of course, this is the perfect time to do it. I'd given up my career in radio for visa issues when we came here. And so I started traveling back and forth to the UK to become a practitioner. But that was my interest in all things mind, body, and and a holistic approach to life really changed. I got interested in, I've done a lot of trauma work and courses. I love oils and, diet and so many different areas. It's sort of broadened my horizon and my understanding of the world. It's helped me to understand that it's okay to question. I was always somebody who, I was quite a good girl and I worked really hard and I followed rules and I didn't really speak up for myself very much. And I mean, I hope I still have some of those qualities still, but now I'm happy to say, well, I have a different opinion and maybe that's not quite right. And I'm sort of trying to encourage my children to think differently about their bodies and their ability to heal. And these past 2 years have been a really interesting time to have a lot of these conversations with them. So it's not that I think I don't know if I can turn around and say I'm so happy that happened. It happened for a reason. That's not kind of how I see it. But I do think that it has just taken me in a particular direction. And I'm grateful for the direction it's taken me in. It's helped me to step into who I am more. And that's kind of what we say with the LP as well. It's the lightning process is about learning how to be that version of yourself that you want to be in the world, and the positive health benefits of the amazing side effects. And I think that's what it really helped me do, that as well as getting my health back on track. So yeah, it's really helped me step into who I am without sounding too LA and woo woo, but that's kind of how I feel.
No, no, definitely. And is it, do you say you got, is it a son and a daughter or two daughters?
Two daughters.
Two daughters. Yeah, they're just so lucky to have, a mum that knows about that kind of stuff, because, I guess I hope that next generation, people's parents do have a greater understanding of those kinds of things, rather than, and again, it's not their fault, but my parents just blindly trusting GPs and just, they are, the be all and end all. And hopefully, I guess our generation will pass on greater knowledge to the next generation, and then it will keep progressing. So yeah, I think they're lucky little girls to have you as their mum, to be able to tell you, all of those things.
I hope so. I'm very aware and I take this in a good way. Like I'm going to make mistakes, and I have made mistakes, and I'll continue to make mistakes. That's just part of parenthood. But
Yes.
if I can help them understand themselves better, and if they can always come to me with questions and they feel empowered, that's one of my goals, I guess.
Awesome. And just finally, for someone who's listening to this right now, you mentioned that a lot of people who come to you are probably, at their 10th, 12th, 20th thing of like trying to do, and then they're quite desperate. And a lot of people listening to this will also be probably at the lowest point. What would be your advice to them in order for them to like keep going and keep moving forward?
I would say keep hope alive. Really check in with who you're surrounding yourself with, and I mean not just the physical people around you, but online as well, because it's very easy to go down a rabbit hole feeling like it's a support group, but actually it's just lots of people, again, with absolute compassion and no judgment, but just talking about symptoms and bad experiences, which can just get us into fight and flight response even more. If you're going to look online, and sometimes you have to swim through that stuff to get to the other side, but find people who've created change. Look for the hope, look for the success stories, and have that mind frame of if it's possible for one, it's possible for all. If somebody can get better, that means it is possible. And then just learn as much as you can about how they did it, and speak to them and research and look for things. So the other thing is, as part of that, so keeping hope alive and doing lots of research, seeing, like I said before, seeing all these amazing modalities that are out there as a really great thing, and call people, because I know myself and anybody in the LP register, and I'm sure this goes for most practitioners in other areas too, like, give me a call and let's chat. Let me see if I can help. And also, you want to not just find a modality that resonates with you, but find a practitioner that does too, because somebody might love the lightning process but hate me, and that's not going to be helpful, right? You want to be working with somebody that you trust, that you believe in, that you feel is on your side, that's your biggest cheerleader. So I think that the two things have to go together, like a modality that resonates and a person that you're working with. And when those two come together, I think that's kind of where the magic can be.
Definitely. I couldn't agree more with that, and finding the right person and the right process for sure. Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story, and answering my incessant questions about the process. If people wanted to connect with you, or just as I said, maybe find out more about your what it is you do, how would they do that?
So they can, my website is jodiegoss.com, so JODIEGOSS.com, and I'm on Instagram as Jodie Goss Coaching. So those are the two best ways. So either email or DM, or just give me a call. I'm so happy to chat with anybody, just to see if I can help at all.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And it's really nice to hear that even after being in the US for 10 years, you haven't got one of those weird American English accents that people can get. Do you say like a lot of American words now?
I don't. My children have quite strong accents. Oh,
Yeah, no, I remember when I was in America and I was calling football boots cleats, and that was getting to me. Uh,
I think the most American I get is using the term sidewalk and backyard. That's about as far as I'll go.
cool. Look, thanks so much for coming on, and really excited to get this episode out there to everyone. I know it's going to be really powerful to everyone. So yeah, thank you so much again.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.